This is the first ever Mazda CX-50, and it's also the first Mazda to come out of the Mazda&Toyota plant in Alabama, though it doesn't ride on the new rear-wheel drive based architecture that future models like the CX60 will. What this means is that it's very similar to the CX5 that we have some experience with, so let's hop in and see how it stacks up. So yes, it's built on the same front-wheel drive based architecture that underpins the new CX30. However, this CX50, along with every other CX50, gets iActive all-wheel drive as standard. How about that? What you'd also get as standard is the NA version of the 2.5 we're so familiar with in Mazda's lineup. That mixed with the 6-speed automatic is the reason that Mazda jumped up to one of the most reliable brands, at least according to Consumer Reports. The naturally aspirated engine, which is what Sadie and I have in our CX5s, makes a solid 187 horsepower and 186 pound-feet of torque, but we can do better than that. What we have here is the 2.5 liter inline 4-cylinder, but with the twin scroll turbocharger pumping out 256 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. But of course, that's on the expensive premium gas, and of course, all the power still goes through the same 6-speed automatic transmission Mazda. However, one thing we always notice with the turbo Mazda units is how much less sprightly they feel, especially at low speeds. Maybe it's turbo lag, or maybe it's added weight, but give it half a second, and any pep you missed in the first second, you've made up for that by the second. Yeah, speed is nice, but so is fuel economy, especially today. So what you can expect in the turbocharged engine that we have here is about 25 mpg combined, which is what we've seen in our testing this week. If you go for the less powerful, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, that combined figure goes up to about 27 mpg. But of course, the elephant in the room here is that it's 2022. Where are the hybrids? In fairness, Mazda has confirmed that hybrid powertrains are imminent with the CX50, but what I was hoping to see was a debut of the NA, turbo, and the reveal of a hybrid, and then bringing in a PHEV for the second model year. Best case scenario is that hybrids come for model year 2 and PHEV the following year. Much of this depends on the Toyota side of things, and more accurately, suppliers. While it's a little bit of a bummer to not have the hybrid powertrain, that's not to say that what we have here isn't good. It's got plenty of power, the engine and transmission are solid and super reliable, but Mazdas have always stood out, to me at least, for the dynamics and the steering feel and the experience that you get behind the wheel. And that continues here. The steering weights up nice and progressively in a corner, it's precise, and it translates a decent amount of feedback from those front wheels. And that's partially because you don't have an all-terrain tire, you have an all-season tire with a little bit better road feel. The CX50 also packs MyDrive, which we've seen in the CX5 we tested a couple months ago. And in sport mode, it throws you down a gear, keeps your turbo spooled, and generally sharpens the car. We didn't have a chance to try the off-road mode, but Mazda say they turn up the G-vectoring to keep more traction from the front tires on looser surfaces. It's a clutch pack in the middle with brake vectoring to redistribute torque for traction. While we didn't personally have a chance to take this CX50 through Road America's off-road course, we have an intimate knowledge of that while testing other vehicles on this channel, and we were at the Mama event where a bunch of our other colleagues got a chance to take this thing through that course, and the feedback was that this thing got through the course with little drama. The same course that we took Raptors and Broncos and stuff through. But what I'm interested in right now is the dynamics. We talked about the steering feel, and it's good, but the ride is also pretty solid here. It's a less sophisticated strut front suspension, and what you have out back is a torsion beam rather than a multi-link independent rear setup, which means it's not exactly a limit handler, but this is kind of the philosophy and the compromise that you get when you're trying to combine something that's a sporty, dynamic Mazda driving experience with something that also needs to have some chops off-road. Plus, they need to keep it from costing an arm and a leg. But honestly, even without the multi-link rear suspension, this CX50 feels pretty dynamic, and that's thanks a lot to the iActive G-vectoring Plus system, which gives this car complete control over what wheel is getting what power and when. So behind the wheel, the CX50 is quick, the transmission is smooth while not sports car sharp, but in a CUV it doesn't need to be. The steering is good, the suspension and ride are solid and substantial feeling, and it has a really robust all-wheel drive system. All of that is to say, while on paper the CX50 doesn't reinvent the wheel, it does stay consistent with the high standard I and so many others hold Mazda to. Now let's step outside and chat some more. Okay, so behind the wheel, it's not a huge departure from what we're used to from Mazda, but as we start to step outside, that's when you kind of start to get the sense that this is the sexier sibling to the CX5, which is why I had to come correct with the all-new black jorts, downshift exclusive. You guys are getting premier access to it, so thank you for being here for this video. When we start to talk about the way that this thing looks, let's start with the paint. It is, well, let's talk about the philosophy of this thing first. Mazda went to great lengths to convey the off-roading nature of this thing. And then, again, in their press release, they start to talk about how, well, realistically, it's going to be less than 10% of people and less than 10% of the time it's going to be off-road. But anyway, you have this zircon sand metallic paint. It's like a $400, maybe $500 option. I think it looks cool. I think that I would probably have this with the Meridian package that is TBD or to be coming, with kind of the roof basket and the different wheels, but I think the paint as it stands is pretty handsome. Now, when we start to talk about the front fascia, generally speaking, looking at this thing, it is kind of more squat vertically and more widened horizontally. And that's really apparent from the front fascia here. You have these wide fender flares over your front wheels, and then you have these kind of like bulges in the hood kind of coming down, directing your attention to the Mazda grille and logo. I really like the black kind of lattice work that they have in here. It's almost like a chain link. It's off-road and ruggedy looking. But you do have these headlights, which again look like they're from the CX5, but they kind of like cut the top and bottom inch off. So again, kind of squat, a little bit widened. And then right here is like, you have this shelf where you could put like the Harry Potter discography, not discography, that's the wrong word, but like the book set here, or a pint. It's huge, it's really big. The entire front fascia is just a lot more busy than you would get in the CX5. The CX5 is a lot more streamlined, it's a lot more elegant, and this, you can tell, is a lot more rugged-esque. So here you actually have functional aero. This is gonna be an air curtain bringing air around your front wheel, better aerodynamics. You've got these kind of, this is your blinker, is yellow kind of fog ditch light, whatever. But you also have your radar detector down there, and this kind of skid plate looking thing. It's not functional, you don't have any underbody cladding, but it's supposed to give you the idea that you have some sort of armor down there if you are to go off-road. From the front, I think this thing looks the business, but let's talk about the side. Around here, this is kind of where we're gonna start to talk a little bit more about the CX5 and how it compares. Now, the CX5 is a couple inches shorter, and that's very apparent. I have one obviously in my garage, parking next to it, and this thing is a couple inches longer, and that translates to the wheelbase, which translates to the cabin, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But what we have here is, of course, the off-road spec, scratchy black plastic, and a huge amount of it around your wheels and on your rocker panel and all the way back. And what it's covering is these 20-inch wheels. If you've ever been off-roading, you know you probably don't want 20-inch wheels, and you probably don't want all-season tires. You'd probably want an 18-inch wheel with an all-terrain tire. But again, we start to talk about what Mazda's said with their philosophy of this thing is they're very self-aware, and I think the fact that the people that do buy this, maybe less than 10%, probably less than 10% of them are going to go off-road at all, and of those 10%, only 10% of the time or less are going to actually spend time off-road. And of that 10%, of those 10% of people, 5% or 50% is going to be stuff like this, which a Honda Civic could do. So they're not going to compromise the look, the driving dynamics. Mazda really prides themselves on their feeling behind the wheel, as we talked about. So they're not going to compromise that aspect of the driving experience by having, you know, big all-terrain tires that give you less grip on the road, less confidence, and also make a lot more noise. So I think they've made a very self-aware decision, and I kind of commend them for it because, again, we haven't tested it off-road today, but we were at the Mama event and a lot of other journalists did, and it got through the course just fine with things like Broncos and more serious off-roaders. But as we continue to talk about the design here, we got black wing mirror, black window treatments all the way back, except for this tiny little bit here. I'm not exactly sure why they decided to make this chrome, but they have. Also chrome roof rails. Again, a little bit interesting. Everything is black and tan except for here, and that's about it. Again, Meridian package, you'll get that kind of like roof basket. You can option it, I believe, as an accessory. I don't think I mentioned you have 8.6 inches of ground clearance, so that's about another inch that you would get from the CX5, and yet the roof still doesn't come up quite as high as the CX5. interestingly enough, pano roof, one of the first Mazdas to get it. But the thing that really dominates your experience from looking at this thing is the huge flared fender. You've got one up front, you've got one back here. The one up front does have an air curtain. This one has an air curtain looking thing, but doesn't actually function as an air curtain. And then, much like the headlights, your taillights are kind of squat and elongated from a horizontal perspective. And then in terms of the rear design, it's pretty simple. It's a simple kind of rear wing, small Mazda logo, CX50 all-wheel drive, iActive turbo, all that stuff. You've got, again, kind of a skid plate looking silver bumper treatment in your lower fascia, and then you've got dual exhaust. But let's jump inside because there's a lot to talk about in there. Okay, so then on the interior, it's very typical Mazda design language, but with a slightly more kind of outdoorsy nature to it. The cross stitching that you get across your dash and your door card, it's kind of like bigger X's. It's less of the small, tighter weave. It's kind of more rugged and more outdoorsy looking. You also get camel piping and stitching within your seat, which is, you know, kind of a nice kind of upscale treatment. And you do also have, you know, some heated and cooled seats and heated steering wheel, and we'll get to stuff like that. But it is a very, very nice interior from a design perspective. The leather cladding on the dash as well as the door card has got like a nice padding to it. It feels very expensive. There's just a bit too much piano black on your center console, around your gear selector, and around kind of your iDrive style wheel. At least for my taste. And then as far as some of the tech features, it's about as nice as you would expect a smaller manufacturer like Mazda to bring. You have a pretty comprehensive head-up display with a lot of information up there. You've got a semi-digital gauge cluster. I think it's about 7 inches worth of screen, and there's not a lot of customizability, but I guess it's nice that it's digital. It does give you some options there. And then the really big thing that I think is missing is kind of the active lane keeping assist. It's not worked like at all. If you start venturing into another lane, once 2 of your wheels are in that lane, it'll thrust you back into your original lane, but it doesn't do like a lane centering like some of the more robust systems would do. The infotainment system, it's pretty nice. It's responsive. You get wireless CarPlay. The interesting thing about this screen is that when you're in CarPlay, you can use it as a touchscreen. When you're not in CarPlay, it will not function as a touchscreen. You have to use the Mazda wheel down here, which, you know, personally I don't have a problem with, but just something to be aware of. But as far as some of the, you know, more robust features, you have 360 camera. The resolution is fantastic. I know it's something we've complained about in previous years and previous models, so that's really good. I do, again, like the interaction with the iDrive style wheel. You've got shortcut buttons down here. You've got hard buttons for your HVAC and your fan and your heated seat, your cooled seat, as well as your heated steering wheel. So that's fantastic to see up here. You do get Bose audio, and that's pretty standard across a bunch of the Mazdas that we've tested. It's a decent system. It's not, you know, quite as nice as something like a luxury car, like a Harman Kardon, Bang & Olufsen, or, you know, like a Mark Levinson, but it is a pretty good system. I like it. And oh, I almost forgot to complain about this. The seatbelt reminder in here is infuriating. The second that the engine is on, the second that the car is on and your seatbelt isn't buckled, it will chime at you. So my ritual is I get in the car, foot on the brake, start button, and then I put the seatbelt on. So the half second that it takes me to hit the button and then grab my seatbelt and then plug in, it's already dinging at me. I'm still in park, I'm not in drive, but it's already yelling at me. Maybe you can program that off, but just, again, be aware. And then in terms of storage, you do have a little bit of storage up in front of your cup holders, up in front of your gear selector for something like a wallet or a phone. You do have a wireless charging pad down behind your MMI system and your gear selector. It's kind of a small pad. I've gotten it to work. It's kind of hit or miss, but it's kind of nice. But then you get to your actual like center console. It opens a lot like, you know, some BMWs and Mercedes would, where it's kind of the split opening. My wife hates it. I don't mind it. I think it's cool. The cup holders are too small for the emotional support water bottle, as pretty much everything is, but they're also like tucked up underneath the HVAC controls. So even if you had a taller water bottle, like good luck, it's going to turn your heated or cooled seat on. But, you know, of course you get door bins and your typical glove box and that sort of stuff as well. One of the nice things is the pano sunroof, and this is something we talked about on the outside, but it is nice to finally have something like this, bringing in more light, making the cabin feel a little bit bigger, especially because a lot of these Mazda interiors, at least the press cars that have been spec'd, are black interiors. So it's nice, although it also opens, which I guess is nice, but it has this big black bar in the middle. So, you know, obviously you have to have that so it can open, so it can hinge somewhere, but it does kind of take up some real estate. I don't know, I feel like I might prefer it if it was just one big sheet of glass that didn't open. But then as we start to talk about the back seats, this is where we start to reap some of the advantage of the longer wheelbase. You do get more room back there, noticeably more room than you would get in the back seat of a CX5. You do get heated rear seats. They fold pretty flat, which is really nice. And then you also get some nice amenities like air vents back there for, you know, air conditioning or heating, as well as map pockets and cup holders and stuff like that. They do fold 60-40 to get into the trunk. And then, of course, speaking of the trunk is a really good size. It's a really usable package. It's noticeably bigger than the CX5, and that's kind of continuing to be the theme that we've seen here. The only complaint that I have overall is just the fact that it feels much more like you're driving a tall sedan or coupe rather than an SUV or CUV, and that's something that I'm used to from my CX5 and Sadie's CX5, where there's a lot more headroom and the windshield is less slanted, so I feel like I have a little bit better visibility. If I sit up any higher to get more visibility downward, then I'm really close to the roof. If I sit lower, then I feel like I'm, you know, right under the hood and I'm missing visibility right in front of me. So that is something to be aware of, but as far as the actual space in here, I'm not super cramped. It is nice to have the roof open. The rear seat being bigger is nice, and then the trunk being bigger is also nice. So overall, it's an incredibly usable package, and I think that's probably a good time to get into final thoughts. So the CX50. The big question I went into this week with was, how is this better or worse than the CX5? And I think where it comes down to is this. It's 5 to 10% better everywhere, aside from the shorter interior ceiling. It feels sharp, it looks fantastic, the back seat is a whisper bigger, and so is the trunk. Overall, I really like this CX50. I'll just be waiting for the hybrid or PHEV if it was me. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next one.